this is the most powerful aspect of communist ideology, is that it provides a vision. But the problem with that vision is that it's atheistic and unspiritual. It doesn't recognize some very deep truths, which is that history is not a secular movement from feudalism to capitalism to socialism to communism. It's a providence of restoration, and the communists believe that they can change human nature by imposing this external force, the power of the party, which Lenin was instrumental in introducing. So we have Marxism as the theoretical, philosophical side, and Leninism as the practical implementation side. That vision is very powerful, but in my VOC worldview that I present is that history is a providence of God, a restoration providence, where the problems of society are actually problems of human nature, and that there's a contradiction within people, and that has to be addressed in order to solve the problems of the world. But again, this is a very powerful vision that has deceived millions and millions of people around the world.
Well, I mean, is it even possible to change human nature? Because, yes, communists believe that they could do that. This idea that, oh, everyone will just work for the greater good, from each according to ability, to each according to need. But it turns out that human nature does not work like that. And when you put people in that situation where they receive the same benefits regardless of how much they work, they just, on average, not everyone obviously, but on average, people work a lot less. They don't work nearly as hard. They don't care as much about their jobs. And overall productivity falls dramatically. And at the same time, people don't really want to be equal. If you're at the bottom, you want to be equal because it allows you to rise up. But if you're at the top, you don't want to be equal with everyone else. And so what happens inevitably in all these communist systems is that, there becomes an elite group that gets, if it's not money, it's at least benefits. They get a car that's paid for by the government, a better apartment that's paid for by the government. They get, a better job or position that's paid for by the government. So there's still this elite class that emerges because that's natural in human nature. And so is, working to achieve something for yourself. And you can argue whether that's good or bad, but that is how humans work, right? And so isn't communism kind of showing that they're not actually able to change that?
Yeah, they're saying that if you just change the economic system, that will solve all the problems. And we know that that's not true. I would go back to Jesus, who said, "You must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect." Whether that's possible or not, you can debate that, but it clearly identifies that the problem is much deeper than the economic system. And yet, that vision, this idea of an ideal world under communism, is so powerful. But yet, those of the faith, most of the world's faiths recognize that the human nature problem is really the root of it. And then once you solve that, then we can have somehow an ideal society down the road. But without that spiritual aspect, what we're going to see would be a world dominated by a system that has a body count in the tens of millions, if not even more, or scores of millions. Yeah, it won't be a good world if the Chinese Communist Party takes over the world, as they're claiming to do in their internal ideological writings.
Well, this is the problem with absolute materialism, which, it reduces everything to just atoms bumping around. And so if you look at everything in the world as being essentially scientific, that means everything can be measured and quantified and then controlled.
Yeah.
And so people in power, this is when you get German political sciences, German social sciences, the idea that you can, even with human behavior, quantify it, measure it, and ultimately control the outcome. And so this is the idea that society will evolve along these paths until you reach socialism, eventually communism. And as you mentioned, this is pretty pervasive. Klaus Schwab, WEF, World Economic Forum, famous for, in 2030, we will own nothing and be happy. Never be happier. He was one of the earliest people pushing for economic relations with the Chinese Communist Party. I think in 1978 or 79, he invited Deng Xiaoping to speak at Davos. He didn't attend, but then he went to China. So how much of a problem is it that there are these people in the West, we'll call it the West, who also believe that inevitably, because of this historical evolution of society, the U.S. is in decline, capitalism cannot continue, and there will be this greater Star Trek utopia?
Yeah, I think that's one of the key idea problems facing us, the idea of scientism, that unless you can measure it, weigh it, and apply theories to it and prove it true, that it's not true, that there is no truth. I think we're really talking about trying to define truth. In the communist sense, they define truth as whatever they will serve their purpose of advancing their regime. But there are things that we can't measure scientifically. For instance, the concept of love, those kinds of things, the nature of God. Although science today is beginning. I mean, you get to the Big Bang theory, and scientists, they can't explain infinity. They can't really explain, what came before the Big Bang theory, the creation. But my view is that we've got to get, and again, science is working to be able to come up with the spiritual aspect of nature. I mean, there are all kinds of things where we're starting to do that. And once we do that, that is ultimately going to be the key to defeating the materialist, atheist, communist system.
Yeah, the example I always give is like, science is good and all, but if your marriage is falling apart, it won't help you. There's more to human experience than scientific materialism.